Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, the podcast designed for heads of school, principals, and anyone else looking to enhance and improve Jewish day school education. I am very pleased to have with us today a veteran, talented head of school, Dr. Amy Platt, who is the head of school at the Penna Downtown Jewish Day School in Toronto, a thoughtful and really talented leader that I've had the pleasure of working with in a number of contexts. And I was really thrilled, Amy, when you agreed. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
It's really nice to be with you, Barry. Thank you so much for having me.
And what we want to talk about today, which I think is a timely topic, particularly around the spring, is the idea of day school accreditation. And many of the heads that I work with have a looming accreditation, either first time, a visit, mid accreditation, check in, whatever it is. We know that these things come with a lot of paperwork, a lot of checklists, a lot of requirements. And many of us as school leaders see it as kind of a little bit of a pain in the neck, to, use the technical professional term. Amy, when you and I were talking earlier, you mentioned that you actually have found your accreditation processes to be tremendously helpful and not really a bureaucratic thing, but really a value driving piece for your school. And I think you've said that you've seen this in other schools as well. So I'd love to hear that perspective and be able to share it with others. Before we get deep into that, just give us a couple words on your experience in the headship. Where are you now? And then we'll dive into our focus on accreditation.
Sounds great. So, Barry, I am in my 9th year of headship at the Penna Downtown Jewish Day School. This was my first headship, and it followed maybe 8 years of senior school administration in a Jewish day school in Toronto. And previous to that, I was a classroom teacher. I have a PhD from the University of Toronto. And during some of my years as a classroom teacher and a PhD student, and while I was educational administrator in Jewish Day School, I had the real honor and privilege of teaching pre-service teachers, both in elementary school education, primarily in math education, and also actually in the School of Early Childhood Education at what is now Toronto Metropolitan University, really helping emerging educators learn about human development, mostly in the area of cognition and child development. So that predated my headship. When I became a school head, I had 2 kids under 8, and I knew that headship, parenting, marriage, being a daughter, all of those things would really limit my time for university teaching. But I definitely do miss the adult classroom.
I definitely hear that.
Yeah. I've been at Penna since 2017. And the real journey of Penna has been to come to a school which at the time was, I think, maybe 20 years old, 21 years old, and helping it emerge from being what I like to call a late adolescent school into a real adult of institutions. And in that journey, we had the opportunity to build the school from being a senior kindergarten to grade 6 school into a junior kindergarten through grade 8 school. We have increased enrollment by about 70%. Enrollment was at 143
Wow.
students when we got here, and we're now sitting at 238, maybe targeting 246 for next year, and just really had a great run at building enrollment and philanthropy and staff leadership culture, including a really, really tremendous board of directors.
Amazing. Amazing. So if I'm tracking right with your 2 kids under 8, you're the parent actually to 2 human teenagers. So you had the opportunity to take over this teenage school
Yeah.
and turn it into an adult, fully functioning school. And I'm also the parent of some teenagers right now, and watching them grow into fully functioning adults is a wonderful,
Yeah.
amazing, sometimes a little bit more exciting than we'd like journey. Tell us about
Please
the
God, I will turn my 2 high school age children into adults that are as competent and professional as this school has become.
amazing. And I love the way that frames this, right? Because you're not saying, well, I came to the school and I was the head for 9 years. You're saying, I came to the school and we've been able to go through a growth and development process over time. And I'm assuming based on our earlier conversations that the whole accreditation piece was a significant part of that. So just orient us. When did the school go through accreditation and how does that factor into the other pieces of its journey?
For sure. So accreditation at Paul Penna Downtown Jewish Day School was really interesting. Before my time, the Federation in Toronto encouraged all of the affiliated Jewish day schools in Toronto to seek out external accreditation as part of a compliance agreement with the Federation. And there were many opportunities. This predated Prisma. And so my understanding is at the time the school could seek out accreditation from any number of Jewish bodies that were offering some accreditation. And the Canadian Accredited Independent Schools was also an opportunity. And the board of the directors of Paul Penna had, I think, the great foresight and strategic decision making to engage with CASE, the Canadian Accredited Independent Schools, and make the decision to seek out accreditation that was beyond the Jewish community and an accreditation body that had within it Jewish day schools. So we are not the only Jewish school in our Canadian Independent School Network. We are one of probably 10 Jewish day schools in our Canadian Accredited Independent School Network. And it allows us to both have partners that are really like us, and it allows us to seek guidance and knowledge and strategic direction from truly the best schools in Canada, best school leaders, best practices in lay leadership. So when I came to Paul Penna in September 2017, we were really on the edge of our first cycle of accreditation. In fact, I think accreditation had originally been scheduled for spring 2018, which would have put me as the head of school for a full 6 months. And so the school and the accreditation body pushed off the accreditation until fall 2018. So in my second year of headship, we went through our first process of accreditation. We had binders and binders of material and all of the documentation to show that we were doing all the things that they wanted us to do. It pushed us to create a whole set of practices and policies and really think about the strategic direction of the operations of the school, the board of the school, the education of the school, the fundraising at the school, the recruitment and retention policies and strategy at the school. It helped us look at the school in an incredibly holistic way. That first accreditation was exactly what it was meant to be. It was an opportunity for strategic growth. And over the course of the next 2 years, we were able to meet the requirements of the recommendations, celebrate the commendations, and really think about how CASE could leverage us to grow, how we could look at our strategic plan, how we could think really intentionally about building out the school to further meet the needs of Jewish families and students in the downtown of Toronto. And from that came the decision to open a middle school to bridge the gap between elementary school and high school. Pre this middle school, Paul Penna Downtown Jewish Day School was the only elementary school in Toronto that ended in grade 6. And it created an opportunity for kids to off ramp Jewish day school before they went to the community high school. And we really wanted to bridge that gap to both encourage high school attendance and also allow our students to have a really rich middle school experience within a Jewish community in the years of bar and bat mitzvah, in those years where development is hard, to really give them a more protected experience and best prepare them for a local public high school or community of Toronto. And then we hit COVID. And so our
Okay, so I'm going to stop you before we hit COVID because I'm not ready for that. But I just want to, first on a technical note, Amy said CASE. That's the acronym for the Canadian Accredited Independent Schools. So when you hear us say CASE, that's what we're talking about. I love the way you introduced this as integrating with a school's strategic direction. And I imagine there are a lot of people out there saying, like, okay, great, but how? Right. So, can you just pull out a couple of points of what happened in this process that helped you think strategically or pushed you to try to achieve something strategically? How did it help you?
Think about two areas of school functioning that it helped. And what's most interesting is that sometimes accreditation is most helpful outside of the core business of school with which is education. So I think that the accreditation really helped our board think strategically about who the board wanted to be and what were the key skills that we needed on the board. And through our case accreditation and some of the things we learned about governance, it helped us to think about what were the right committees of the board to help the school move forward. And it was at that time that we formed what was called the Real Estate Task Force. We've just recently converted it to a standing committee of the board called the Properties Committee. But that came out of case because we understood that the way we use space as tenants in the Jewish Community Center and now tenants in a local building was strategically core to our mandate and mission and our ability to be financially viable into the future. So that interplay of governance, board work, real estate was really, really important and was driven by the recommendations of our case accreditation. And another area was in fundraising. And Barry, I know you talked to a lot of people about fundraising and philanthropy. And I think our case accreditation helped us to think about philanthropy in terms of buckets: annual
Mhm.
campaign, capital major projects campaign, and ultimately endowment campaign. And it also gave us some opportunity to think about segmenting populations in philanthropy. So to think specifically about how we were meeting the needs and best stewarding the capacity of our parent population, how we were engaging grandparents and for what purpose. And finally, something that we're really still working on as we become a more mature school is how we connect with alumni, students, and families from the potential of engagement, vision, mission, messaging, philanthropy, and soon, I hope, second generation recruitment.
Amazing. Okay, second generation. We'll come back to that because that is awesome. I want to just pull out there the governance points you were mentioning because we know, and I've said this before on this podcast, that the single most important relationship in a school is between the head of the school and the president or chair of the board. And together, as that dyad, you are leading the school, you are leading the board, and that's one of the most tricky and challenging things to do. You were mentioning your background as an educator. That's where I came from as well. I also did the teacher training at the university level, but that doesn't necessarily teach you what governance is. Um, and so the accreditation, it sounds like, came in and basically said, here are some best practices in governance. And for those who haven't done an accreditation process, it often says, here are best practices. Show us where you are in relation to these. So, was it the sort of thing that they said, okay, here's standing committees, here's board function, here are the following things, show us where you are? And you're like, oh, we're not there. So maybe, maybe we should go in this direction.
I honestly can't remember what came out of 2018 around government governance. There were a lot of recommendations about bylaws and thinking about who were the people on the board and the size of the board. That was probably one of the biggest things that came out of
Mhm.
that accreditation. And so from there, we really were able to think about if we were to shrink our board from, let's say, 19 people to 12 people, how would we think strategically about the skills of those 12 people to make the best board, to be able to meet the standards that the accrediting body set out in terms of committees and task forces and chairs of those committees and things like that. So that was probably something that happened around governance then. In this most recent accreditation, we are just through our second accreditation process. Like, we finished it 2 weeks ago. I think what will come out based on what we wrote in our self study are some opportunities for growth for the board in best practices with respect to risk management, mostly with respect to identifying potential risk and thinking about reasonable ways to mitigate that risk without being buried in risk that we don't even know exists. And
Sure.
so I think that those are some of the ways that the accreditation has really helped governance. I also think the process has engaged our board members. And so the board as a whole, led by one outstanding board member, were responsible for writing what in our accreditation is called Standard 3. It turned out to be a 35-page document with
Wow.
many, many attachments documenting the processes of the board. And so that was such a good process to say, what are our processes? What do we want to change as we're writing it to think about best practices? How do we make sure we're all aware of our practices? And now, for better or worse, Standard 3 as a document becomes a standing piece of the board manual for onboarding new board members. And it's such a good Bible, as it were, for helping our governors understand what the opportunities, responsibilities, potential is for serving on the board. And it has been a great opportunity to professionalize the way our board works and functions.
That's amazing. So it sounds like what you did in that first round was really use the accreditation process as a lever, right? And it's not easy often as heads partnering with our board president to move certain things on the board, right? Especially if your board might be 20. The board that I started with, I think officially was 35,
Oh my
because
gosh.
it makes sense to sit down with 35 people in a room and have a good discussion. We were able to shift that over time in our bylaws down to a much more reasonable number, as you were. But sometimes that requires an external lever. And so one of the things we're saying about accreditation is it gives you that external point of reference that you can say together with your board, hey, here's what people around the country are doing that's working. Should we be doing that? And then in the second round, you got into more depth, and you're saying, okay, now we're talking about risk management. That's a fairly advanced level of board governance function, and you're continuing to push it along. And the last thing I want to highlight there is your board manual, your board Bible that emerged from there. And the
Yeah, it was
idea that, right, and I hope that everybody listening to this is saying, okay, what Amy just said was whenever I have a new board member come on, they read our policies because we have a combined list. Now, it's not like the most exciting reading, I'm sure. It's not a great plot, but it's crucial because that means your board members come on understanding the ethos of your board, understanding what you're trying to accomplish, what your approach is to governance. And it's such a key practice that I think we could adopt in many, many more of our schools.
I think so. I want to I want to just make sure that I can highlight that, from 2018 and our learning from that accreditation to the learning we've just completed in 2025, our involvement with our accrediting body hasn't been like nascent. Like it's been alive and well for the professionals and the board. And so, I got to COVID and you said, no, no, I don't want to go to COVID. But I want to go
We can go
back.
back,
Yeah,
go
I want to
back.
go back to COVID just to say that it was in COVID that I really came to understand the value that CASE could bring to the school beyond accreditation. And so in COVID, CASE began a practice of weekly heads meetings. And so every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, and the time stays the same, although the frequency has reduced, any head of school across the country who wanted to get on a call and talk to other heads of schools was there and able to have that conversation. And so it was in those weekly calls that I felt like I was able to ask questions, gain insight, and be so much more proactive in our step by step reactions to the things that were happening in this crazy world around us. So it was there that we started to, I was like, oh, a pandemic task force. That's something we can have too. And when we started to think about back to school, I was able to get sample schedules of hybrid learning from the best schools in the country, big schools, small schools, and compare ideas. And so it was in those years of COVID that I came to understand the value. And actually, what then happened was the Toronto Jewish Day Schools, who were part of the Canadian Accredited Independent Schools, we created our own mini group. And so the four of us started to meet weekly. to talk about, okay, what are our very local practices? And then the other Toronto elementary school heads and high school heads actually asked to join our group. And that meeting still continues on a bi weekly basis, where all of the Toronto heads of schools gather to have conversation. And that came to be of great advantage to us post October 7th, when we had to have a new set of crisis conversations around responses to kids and families and security, and making sure that we were aligning security or sharing security protocols. And then in that moment, post October 7th, again, I felt the support of the Canadian Accredited Independent School Network and colleagues and friends that I had made who reached out. Our neighborhood independent school, literally across the street, to say, how can we support your community in this time? Can I come over and visit? Can we have tea? Can I be an emotional support to you? And it's been just an amazing, amazing opportunity to learn and gain support. The last piece of the accreditation process is that you're accredited by a peer review team. So when we were accredited, seven amazing educators from other schools across the country just came into our school. But as members of the accreditation organization, we have the opportunity as heads of school, as principals, as director of operations, to go into other schools. So all of my senior leaders have had the opportunity to spend 4 days in an exceptional school in this country, looking at their area of practice. And then from that experience, bringing back little tidbits to make our school better. And in December, I had the opportunity to go and lead the accreditation for King David High School in Vancouver with my friend and colleague, Dr. Seth Goldswag. And that was an amazing opportunity for me to spend 4 days in Vancouver in a school that had a very deep personal connection to my family history, um, and see an incredible school in action and feel like I might be a tiny bit a part of their growth story as they move forward.
Right. And so, look, what I love about what you just said is I think when we sometimes think accreditation, especially for heads who haven't gone through it before, we might think, you know, it's the auditor. It's like the tax auditor, the IRS or CRA in Canada, right? Coming to catch me doing something wrong. And it's actually a group of your peers. And I've been on these committees as well, the visiting committees, who want to come in and help you. And so when you're saying accreditation, what you're actually saying is joining a community of colleagues from around your region or around your country. So you have those community resources that you were talking about, and the accreditation process itself is designed to help you. So, it's not a gotcha process.
No,
I was
not at
speaking to
all.
another head that just this week who's completing accreditation and said, look, the member of the visiting committee is putting together their report, but they certainly took the time to sit down with me and say, how can this report be helpful to you? How
Mhm,
can we help move you forward? It sounds
mhm.
like exactly the same experience you're describing and so helpful to the school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you talked, Barry, about the importance of the head chair relationship, and my board chair and my past board chair, who both have their fingerprints all over this accreditation report and process, felt so proud and so affirmed about the work they've done on the board and moving the mission, vision, values of the school forward, that the accreditation process has deepened their commitment to their work and their school. And when we had the opportunity to meet in person, it was this past October, I think, in Kelowna, British Columbia,
Mhm.
at the Kids Heads and Chairs conference, which probably is my favorite 3 days of the year because, I mean, people who love governance are weird folk, and then you bring them all in conference center together. It's pretty fun for us. That opportunity year after year after year with different heads and chairs, well, heads in the, professional heads, but for me to have partnered in different cities at different conferences with different chairs really strengthens our relationship in the context of our accrediting body, and helps us to learn from other heads or chairs about how to move schools forward strategically. And so if I had to say that I had a favorite part of case, It is the Heads and Chairs Conference. And this year, the Heads and Chairs Conference will be in Toronto. And we're hoping to bring our vice chair with us because cost will be different. And, you know, introduce the incoming chair to what CASE is all about and some best practices in independent school governance.
Right. And that just speaks to the fact that for our boards and our board chairs, we talk about the head of school being a lonely position. Being a
Hmm.
board chair is also a very lonely position. You haven't necessarily seen how any other school has worked. You're working on things, you're struggling with things, and being part of a community, again, that allows you to see how other schools are doing this. And I was just, I loved the conference in Cologne as well, not only because it was one of the most beautiful places that exists, I think, anywhere, right in the middle of the Canadian Rockies. But when you see a whole bunch of lay leaders coming together and saying, okay, we want to do the best job we possibly can for our school and our community. This isn't our profession, but we're here to learn from each other and we're going to take advantage of these resources is tremendous. And what CASE, and I know the NAIS in the States, and again, many regional bodies do similar things. What they do is they provide the framework to say, here's where you can get together. Here are the researched and acknowledged practices that work in governance. And now let's talk and learn together. And again, it's that socialization process, very similar to reading your board manual or your standard 3 that you talked about before, that helps all your people be on the same page. And you're doing that proactively rather than waiting till something goes wrong and then trying to correct a board member who isn't engaging effectively because no one ever helped them understand what effective engagement means in the first place.
For sure. 100%.
This is amazing. And I know, look, you said people, governance geeks, I would count myself among those. I could talk about this for a whole lot longer, but we are going to let people go back to their own busy days. But thank you so much, Amy, for taking the time to be with us. You mentioned before the school's Instagram page, which I just wanted to call out because I think it's fascinating and a great look at Paul Penna. So their Instagram handle is Paul Penna, PaulPenna, DJDS, Downtown Jewish Day Schools. That's Paul Penna DJDS. We'll put that in the show notes as well. You can check their website, but you can see a little bit for yourself about this amazing journey that Amy has led the school through. And I just have to say, so much respect to you, Amy. You didn't come in to like, okay, I guess I'll do the job and be the keeper of the school. You came in and said, I hear it in your voice, like, I'm like the parent of the school.
I
I'm here
am.
to guide it, to grow it. I'm the gardener. I'm developing it. And that's just so wonderful for me to see. And I'm so pleased that school has been able to benefit from your leadership in all
Thank you.
those ways. So I think where we're going to go from here is just to highlight, if you haven't thought about accreditation yet, or if you're nervous about it, this is a great opportunity for you to consider, think about it, and think about what levers it might help you pull in your finance, in your governance, in your operations. And if accreditation isn't right for you or it's just not coming up, then think about the other pieces that Amy shared around how you can create community, enhanced community for yourself as a head or a principal, and how you can enhance community for your board chair, your board vice chair, other lay leaders, so they can have the opportunity to learn from others. Try one of those pieces out. And as always, please let me know how it goes. You can reach us at Barry Kislowitz on LinkedIn, Leadership Lenses on Substack, or at our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.